Welcome everybody. This is the Ansteorran Heraldic and Scribal Symposium. I am Olm Dotha Willa McMurray, a member of the Order of the Laurel. And I am teaching a class on making your own Glair. Glair, by the way, can be used as a watercolor, so that's why I mentioned the watercolor. So what we're going to do is talk about how you start with the pigments and you end up with a paint that was used through much of history. In fact, let me see. Let's start with definitions. So the first thing is, most of the time in history, people didn't buy paint. They definitely did not buy paint in tubes like we do. Not prepared, ready to use. You had to prepare your own pigments, your own paints. And that gave you control. After all, there were some unscrupulous merchants out there who might do things to your paint that you didn't want to have done, to stretch them, to make them cheaper to sell. So you would temper your own paint, and to do that, you would mix that ground pigment with some sort of a binder. In this case, our binder is going to be egg, in fact, specifically egg whites. There's another one that you could do with egg yolk. We'll talk a little bit about that. The pigment is that source of color for the paint. It comes from a bunch of different places. Most of them are mineral-based. So this is why I have the picture of my desktop here, so I can show you things like this. This is malachite. So those are little rocks. Locally here, or in today's world, you can buy them by going to gem shows and buying the cheap gems. And just don't tell them you're going to take them home and grind them up. You can also buy the necklaces. I don't know why anybody would make these into a necklace, but and they work just fine. They're ground up malachite. You want good color. Malachite, azurite, they tend to grow together, so finding somewhere they've separated them out already for you is a big step. Some of them are colorful clays. Clays are a little easier. I've not actually done my own clay, or converted my own mud into colors, but there's a lot of mud painting out there. There's some really good clays. If you live in a place like that, there's some tricks to do that. Otherwise, you can buy them. This one here is from Mamer, SPA, Italy. Anyways, I repackaged it, but it's a yellow ochre. And here's a green earth, which is basically terra verte or green dirt. And then, of course, a lot of the browns. This is called an English red, but it's just a dirt. So you can buy the dirt tones, the earth tones. I really like using those. They give a nice deep color to it. Here's another one, burnt sienna. That's where they take the dirt and they burn it just a little bit to get that color. So those are most of the places. There are some that are poisonous. A lot of them, they use a rust method. When I say rust method, verdigris. If you take copper pennies, you leave it sitting out, they turn green. Verdigris is a very common way to do it, and I've just got some that we converted already. So this is the type of color you get from copper. And that's literally, we took copper sheets, and I think I put a little honey on this one and left it in vinegar with vinegar vapors around it. The other one that was done in period was lead white. Very similar technique, basically sheets of lead over a vinegar bath, and it develops, well, lead rust, which is lead white. Somewhere here I've got a little bit of, yeah, I think that's my lead white. If you don't do it right, your lead white can be gray. I've got one in here somewhere that's the wrong way, where we got lead gray instead of lead white. I know when I first started in the SCA, there was a lot of concern. They said, don't use this, it's terribly poisonous. I had somebody show a small vial and said they wouldn't open it because they contaminated the room. It's not that dangerous. The dangerous part is that it tastes sweet. I've been told, I haven't tasted it myself. And so that when they use it in paints, kids would lick it, and it affects your brain, especially a developing and young growing brain. So don't lick your brushes if you use it. Wash your hands. Do all the basic things. Don't breathe the dust, and you're fine. But with that said, be careful. Don't pull it out with kids around. So there's a lead white. So the other really interesting poisonous ones, and these are ones that I have not prepared, because these you want to probably wear a mask. Here's Cinabar, which I always get these two mixed up. Cinabar, I believe, is, let's see, go the way that I need to go to get to the camera. There we go. Cinabar is, I believe, the arsenic based. And orpiment is the mercury base, and these are very common. Cinabar gives you that orangey color, ready orange. And the orpiment was a very common yellow or the base for a green if mixed with an indigo lake. So you can see why they wanted to use these colors. They're gorgeous. I don't prepare those. And again, not kid friendly. Be careful, a little more careful with them. But they mix up all the same. So your entire purpose is to take something and to grind it down, yes, with a mortar and pestle, or sometimes you have to be a little more vicious than a mortar and pestle. You make sure you've got a special mortar or a special set aside. I don't know where my mortar is. Just I got my pestle. I have a special one that I only use for grinding pigments or dye stuffs. And the other thing is, in period again, they wouldn't buy the raw rocks. A painter doesn't have time to turn these rocks into pigment. They buy the pigment already pre-ground for them. So they get this pigment that's already ready to go. But if you mix this, you might find that the grinder didn't do that good of a job. So you're probably going to more likely have to mold them. And to mold it, what you need is a good flat surface. I'm using the back side of a plate. If you've got a good tile, that works. I used to have a tile. I don't know where it went. And then you need to have some sort of a molding device, a flat base. The bottom of a good glass jar sometimes works if it's nice and flat. I've got a stone I've got set aside for it that I picked up, whatever works. And the idea is you would put the pigment down here and you'd grind it up with a little bit of water just to get it ground down to that consistency. Be aware there's some pigments where if you grind it too much, you'll get a different consistency than that what you wanted. I just realized there's another pigment I want to grind today. So I'm gonna take that one off and wipe the plate with not my skirt. Okay, not my skirt. But sometimes you get stuff that maybe, even if it was ground before, it sat and it's been not so well ground. This is what's called a lake dye, or a lake pigment. It's from a dye bath that I had. I believe this is the Brazil, no, this has to be the Cochineal. Actually, I'm gonna pull some actual raw from that. There's 1,000 different sources for them. That's what to look for. This is what original Cochineal looks like, by the way. They're small bugs. And you can actually just grind the bugs up and use them, or you can turn it into a dye, basically soak it in water, and then use a little bit of alum and a little bit of washing soda to precipitate it out. But those are the bugs. Cochineal is a New World bug. However, the Kermes bug and some other varieties, I think it's St. John's blood, there's a Polish lac, they're all similar bugs to this, and there are 5 different varieties in Europe. So just because the one that we can get is ours does not mean that it's not appropriate to use. It's very appropriate to use. And the exciting thing about this is you can play around. If you're in pandemic mode and you have nothing else, pull some turmeric out of your spice cabinet and try using it. Don't use it on the good scrolls, but for learning how this works and how to mull and so forth, it'll be just fine. Or if you have been gifted one of those great necklaces of malachite or azurite, there's actually, I don't think there's a class here, but there's probably a YouTube video already on how to levigate azurite. Basically, you grind it up, you put it in a glass jar, you let it settle, you pull out all the impurities off the top, and you do it a couple more times to get to the purest blue. It just takes time, too much for this class. So in this case, actually, I'm going to use some Cochineal lake. This is my Cochineal lake. This is some actual dye stuff that I had precipitated out. So literally just a lake dye. And this is where you take it and you find that flat surface, flat hard surface of porcelain works. In this case, it's a Corningware. And you take your mulling device, whatever it is. Mr. Chauvelina has a statue of Mary, I believe. No, it's Joseph, statue of Joseph that she uses for mulling. But whatever, it works. And the idea is just to grind it down to a finer one. Sometimes you need to add some water to it. This one's pretty forgiving. You can see already. And see the color changes. And that's where with the azurite, you can grind it and turn your blues lighter. So if you want it darker, don't grind it too much. But this one's pretty forgiving on this one. Okay. And that's where I realized I didn't go through my instructions here. I got excited. So binders. The binders there, gum arabic, very flexible and dry. Egg whites, they remain soluble in the water. And egg yolks, they dry very quickly to a waterproof. So you put it on for some of your wood triptychs. You'd use an egg yolk one. There's different names for what these are called, or what these turn out to be when they're done. So, let's see if I can get that one to move. I got so excited about the different pigments. We will go back through some detail on the pigments on my next series slides later. So here, what you do, what they are, gesso is a layer that ravahide glue plus chalk plus limestone. That's what you put on the surface of a new piece of canvas to make it not porous. But sometimes also lay it down for some other techniques to repair your surfaces. Gouache, which is being taught, I think, after lunch, is your pigment, like this, plus whiting, plus gum arabic. And that you can re-wet and work. A watercolor is pigment plus gum arabic, no whiting. That's why it's see-through. And Glair, which is what we're making today, so we got the 3 Gs, gesso, gouache, and Glair. Glair is a pigment plus the egg white. You can re-wet and rework. It's reconstitutable, which is why it works as a watercolor once it dries. You can put it in a shell and you can just keep on reusing it, just like we do with our gouache paints. Now, tempera is where you use the egg yolk. And the tricky part there is it dries really fast. So you have to mix it up in small amounts and then immediately paint with it and then mix some more. And we know that they used Glair and tempera, but we know they used Glair because there's some examples in period where they got a little bit of the egg yolk mixed in, and it shows. Here's an example. This is from the MS-133, which is a fighting manual. I got to actually see it leads and take a picture from an angle. And you see how that's shiny across there? That means this scribe got a little bit of the egg yolk mixed in with their egg white. So the Glair had a little bit of tempera in it, and it didn't behave properly as a paint because of that. So that's something to watch for when we make our Glair. Okay, so now I think, let me see where I jump to. That's right. Your handout goes into pigments next, but I'm going to actually step into how to make Glair. Hopefully I didn't just lose. Are we still sharing? Nope.
Yes, we still have you on the screen.
Oh, good. So I'm gonna get this going now. Okay, my screen blinked for a second. Again. Okay. So let's talk about how to make the Glair because we need a little setup time. That's why I was going to wait on the pigments and got excited because they're so fun to paint with. So to make Glair, what you need, you got your mortar and pestle, but what you really need to make the Glair is, I recommend a couple of different bowls, just because it's best for separating eggs. You need either a sea sponge. This is a piece of sea sponge that I got from Galveston, in fact, or a loofah, one of these vegetable sponges. If you prefer the vegan, don't harm any critters. This was a critter in the ocean. Either of them work, and I wish we could use this when we were actually baking. This is the fastest way to turn egg white into a froth. They need a bowl. I like to do 2 so I can separate it. And then someplace to put your egg weep when you're done. So to do that, you take your egg. They did put an egg in there. And come on. There we go. Crack it and separate out the yolk from the white. By the way, if you keep those seashells, or not seashells, the eggshells, and you let them dry, there's a small membrane on the inside you can peel away, and everything on the outside of this shell is your chalk source or if you need some whiting to make your paint a little more opaque. The reason you do it this way is because that way, if for some reason your yolk breaks, you don't mess up all the other egg whites. So always do that in a separate one, and then you just put them into the bowl you want them to be into. So you got a yolk, you got some egg white. If I wanted to keep the yolk good over time, I throw out a little bit of water on top of it, and let's see, I've got an example over here, the cooking show trick, and it keeps the yolk for a certain amount of time, so you can save it for future use without it drying out too fast. So we're gonna put the egg yolk aside. We don't want it right now. Take the egg white. You need a larger bowl to do frothing of this in, so I'm gonna throw it into a bigger bowl for a second. And you take either your loofah or your sea sponge. I'm gonna use a loofah in this case, and literally squeeze it. And when you squeeze it, it froths. Now, see, you see it's already starting to froth a little bit. And you want to get it basically, you could just beat the eggs, but you know how long it takes to get it to a good soft whipped state? Well, the loofah does it in just seconds. If you use a sea sponge, by the way, be aware there's going to be a little bit of residue because you can never get all the sand out. That's the advantage of these other loofahs. And you can buy the loofahs in the store from the bath section. Any egg that's better than any other? I don't think so. Well, you want something that has good whites. So, I don't know, are there any eggs that are mostly yolk? Those probably wouldn't work. I use the local chicken eggs. So far, they haven't managed to screw those up. So you see that froth? That's what you're trying to get to. Get really good froth out of that. Ugh. And you let it sit for a while. What's going to happen over time is it's going to separate. And you're going to have weep in the bottom. I got a little bit of, who knows what that was from, in there. And I've got an example here, the cooking show trick, of what happens when you let it set for, about an hour or so. So, let's see, from up top, it just looks frothy. But I think in the smaller picture, you can see how it's separated out, and the wheat at the top, or the frost at the top, and there's a bunch of wheat at the bottom. And what you'll do is you'll pour out that bottom stuff and use that bottom wheat for the mixing. It's broken up all the proteins in the egg so that it's not long and stringy anymore. And if it's long and stringy, froth it again. So we're gonna set that aside for a moment, and I'm gonna go into some of the history of the pigments, which is what I should have done before. Okay, oops, instructions here. Yep, separate them, froth them, let them sit. I say overnight, but actually in an hour or so it separates. That wheat, by the way, will tend to smell bad every time. If you can get pure wheat, it actually will not go bad that quickly, but there's usually contaminants in it, and the contaminants smell. So either refrigerate it, or just accept the fact that sometimes it smells. There's a point where it's just gone bad, it's just gone nasty. But as long as it looks pretty clear, even if the smell isn't the greatest, the older wheat is supposed to work slightly better. But there's that point of where that is. And I'll let you make your own judgment call on that. I know I've cleared a room before when opening a bottle of wheat. Okay, so here's some classical pigments. These are ones that were from, well, back in classical times, I think before the Renaissance. White they got from chalk, gypsum, or that lead white that I was talking about, where you take the lead and you put it in a vinegar solution. The blacks, you could take charcoal and grind charcoal up. And for lamp black, what you would do is you would take you take a lamp and you put a plate over it and gather the soot and use that soot off of there. And then bone black, to get bone black, you take your bones, and there's bone black and there's bone white. You take your bones and you put it in an anaerobic situation. So put it inside of something, maybe with some clay around it, or an alkanet or Altoid tin, works too with a hole in it. And you burn it, you heat it up. That's how you make charcoal, by the way, as well. Is you put it in an anaerobic environment where you take as much oxygen out as possible, that one little escape hole for the oxygen, and it comes out black. Otherwise, it comes out white or gray, and that's not the color you want. Yellow's the yellow ochre again, that earth tone versus the orpiment. Actually, put yellow ochre down. I got a little bit of Glair. Got orpiment down. You can see the difference in the colors. Why you'd use one versus the other. I'm going to take the lid off this one. Get it direct. For the orpiment's just a little, there we go. A little brighter in color. A little shinier. So, reds. So the reds, you could use a red ochre, but that's a brownie red. You use a Cinabar, but if you remember, the Cinabar was an orangey red. Dragon's blood, I'm not sure what color dragon's blood is. I have not caught a dragon. It's not really a dragon. I believe it's from a plant. Or no, I think it's from a stone. Oh, the sponge, I was squeezing the sponge, by the way. Squish, 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 squishing it, literally. And my hands are sticky. Make sure you're next to a sink when you do that. That red lead, if you took lead and then you cooked it down, let me see if I can find my minium. No, we didn't cook this far enough. This was supposed to be a red lead minium, but I think we stopped too soon. We've got it just to a yellow minium. Do I have some other minium around here? No, I don't think so. Okay. And that red lake, like I did with the Cochineal I showed you, this is more of a purple than a red for this Cochineal. Brazil. No, this is all my Cochineal collection. Oh, but this one here is a madder red. If you take madder, which is a very common dye, so if you know a dyer, say, can I have your dregs? Can I have the bottom of your pot, the cookie stuff? You can mix it up, add a little bit of alum to it, a little bit of washing soda, and it precipitates out, and dry it out. And this is a madder, what's called a rose madder. Let's see. Yeah, I said the madder and Kermes. Kermes, by the way, is like Cochineal in gypsum, and so they use gypsum instead of washing soda or an alum. Gypsum and lime would do the same thing if they react and fall. Blues, that azurite, they're azurite stones. I should have brought an azurite stone with me. I know we ground up some azurite. Is this my ground azurite? It might be the ground azurite. So I think, oh, wait a minute. Did I find the stones? Ah, found the stones. No, I found the ground up stuff. Yeah, so actually, I think this is my azurite that I ground up some. So I ground it too far probably because I got too light of a blue. I didn't get as dark of a blue as we want. Egyptian blue, that's one of the ones that we can't get anymore. Although there's, every once in a while, there's a hint on that they're trying to figure it out again. And then indigo lake. So they did not have access to ultramarine at this point, unless you were in Russia. It came from Russia. So in the earlier time periods, if you're doing early Celtic knotwork, you wouldn't use ultramarine. The greens, the malachite that I showed you, the stones, verdigris, which is just copper rust, or terravert, which is that earth tone green. So you see your greens are not what we think of as deep greens. To get a deep green, you take some indigo. I have some indigo. You would take some indigo and you'd mix it with the yellow to get one of the deeper greens. And then purple is Tyrian purple. We can't get that now, so we'll have to substitute. That comes from a seashell, and they overproduced it. They killed off most of it. It's hard to get. You can get an ounce for a couple $100, maybe less than, no, I think it's a quarter of an ounce for a couple $100. I couldn't justify it. So that's classical. So let's talk about next age. 15th century. By 15th century, Italy had opened up. Suddenly, you get everything. It was pretty amazing. So yellow, there's a lot of yellow lakes. So we didn't talk about that before. There's some evidence. Whenever they say yellow of unknown origin, it was probably a lake dye. So a dye that they turned into a pigment. It came from whatever was local, whether it was weld, whether it was yellow flowers, lots of yellow flowers out there. Whatever was local, they would have turned into it. Then they had the artificial Naples yellow that was being produced in Italy. The reds, now lac came from India, so this was coming across the spice road, and And you would get the lac is not cochineal. Natural pigment says Egyptian blue. Ooh. Oh yeah, I think that might have been the one where I found that was, the Tyrian purple was expensive. Let me not get distracted here. Lac is not the actual insect. It is the residue the insect leaves on the branch. So it's bug poop. It produces a pretty good, they say red, but it's more of a purple. The artificial vermilion, so there they were faking the matter. There's a question whether it's vermilion was the bug, was the cochineal. But at some point they crossed and started referring to that as the matter and then the other. So be aware of these names, they change over time. So, and that, by 8th century, they figured out how to do an artificial version of the vermilion. They had the Crimson Lake, so that's where you take the matter, so forth, and you lake it down, or cochineal, or Brazil wood, which came, it was available before. Brazil was named after the wood, not the other way around. So you could get that from India at a high price until the New World was discovered, in which case suddenly it became more widely available. Your blues, suddenly you got access to ultramarine, or sometimes they substitute lapis lazuli in. It looked like an ultramarine, but it was cheaper. Your greens, very similar ones. They started getting verdigris from in pine balsam. Maybe that's how they got that deeper, darker, what's called a vine green. Okay? And then let's talk about some modern niche ones. Zinc white and titanium white, those are our substitutes for that lead white that was used everywhere. So perfectly appropriate. Chromium oxide, a lot of the chromes are newer, so they are the more modern ones. Chrome really wasn't used until after the time period of the SCA, so after 1600. But then some of the other blues, so the cobalt blues that we love, the artificial ultramarine, suddenly ultramarine is cheap for us because there's artificial ultramarine. We don't have to buy it from Russia, which is fine to substitute. The cerulean blue, which as cerulean blue, here's cerulean blue, looks an awful lot like this ground up, what I believe is the ground, where's the other one? Labeling, always label your stuff, it makes it easier. There's a ground up azurite, it's pretty close to cerulean blue. If you get the light on it. So some substitutes that are closer. And yeah, the cobalt greens and so forth. So that's how to watch for some of those modern ones, and sometimes they're appropriate substitutes. That's good to know. So, where to find them? Here's a lot of tricks on how to make your own. It's in your handout. You can do everything from your white, take your eggshells and peel. There's an inner layer to them, to the eggshell. It has to be peeled away. Let me see if I can get one to do this for me. Usually it works better dried, but there's a membrane. Okay, let's see if I can show the membrane. Right there, fingers. There's a membrane that peels away. And if you can get that membrane off, there, there's a membrane on there. If you can get that membrane off, everything else that's left is chalk. So this is pure chalk, just needs to be ground up. Waiting for you in your kitchen. And then burning that bone so it's white ash. So you talked about the soot, where you can get soot from, how to do the anaerobic fire for the bone blacks, some different reds, the blues. So I think we've talked about all these colors, yes. Other ones to try some things. If you're just working at home, you're not working on a scroll for somebody that you're worried about the quality on, play around some. Get a feel for that. And by the way, everything grinds differently. So grinding your own also teaches you how far you want to grind it. Some things flow smoothly, and some things, no matter what you do, they're rough. I've got some red that every time I mix it with zinc oxide to make a pink, I just get little grains. So blending sometimes also changes the composition. And it's good to know this as a painter, to really understand your raw materials. And you don't understand that if you just work from a tube. You really have to touch it, feel it, play with it. Okay. I give you a bunch of different sources to buy things from. If you want to actually get these raw pigments, You can buy them. This one's, I don't even know where that's from exactly. Monk McNeil. Oh, McNeil, of course. It's McNeil. Natural Pigments, I believe. No, McNeil's another one. I don't have it on here. I'll have to improve that. But these others were sourced from basically some of these locations. And you get these as they're already pre-ground. You may want to regrind them yourself, but they're halfway there. So let's take a moment. That's right. My reminder, see how that wheat's doing? I'm going to actually pour it out of the bowl into a see-through container. Don't mix it up too much. There's a top layer there of wheat. But if you pull it aside, you can actually see underneath the top layer there, the froth, the foam, it's starting to separate, but it needs more time. That's why you want to give it a little bit of time to separate out. But it's getting pretty close. It actually works pretty fast. That's why I showed you earlier somewhere the shot glass of, yeah, where it's separated out really nice. You don't have to put in a shot glass. That just made it easy to see. And what you do with that then is, I had a small container set aside. I'm just gonna have to do it into a shell. Just pour off the wheat, and just literally, just see it pours right off, out from underneath of that. I'm gonna pour off a little less than that because I'm actually gonna use this to mix. So I've ground some of my pigment already, so I'm ahead of myself. Let's see, mix the Glair. Okay, so we ground the pigment fine, and we did that already on the plate here. So I got that ground pigment. And I'll put that Glair over and start a new shell. By the way, the reason that we mix it in shells, it was believed that the shells had some sort of affinity or magical ability to help the paint, to help it mix. There probably is a chemical reason why the shells help the paints bind together. Or maybe it's just an old wives' tale and we just love it. So we put a little pigment into that shell.
Question from the chat would be, would a coffee grinder work?
Yeah, it could. Be aware, if you're doing ones that will kill you, you might want to have a special coffee grinder set aside. A trick for clearing a coffee grinder between uses if you grind something up like that. Oh, and the rocks may eat your coffee grinder. You may end up going through them a little faster. But for a lot of things, it would work. So trick to clean your coffee grinder of colors is to throw a little rice in there and grind the rice up. The rice will absorb the color and clear your coffee grinder out if you do that. But don't do it with the poisonous stuff, obviously. Okay, so you just literally add a little bit in there and find yourself a mixing stick. I'm going to use a toothpick. And I've literally got a little box of these paints. And it blends together. Now you can use this straight like this. And I may have made mine too thin. If it's too thick, you add a little more Glair or a little bit of water. But you can use it straight like this, or you can let it dry out and add a little water to it, or a little bit more Glair to it, depending on what you want to do. But as you can see, that unlike a lot of the paints, this one's actually really dark. Yeah, I need to add more. There's too much weep into that one, so throw a little bit more. And I'm making this. I should have done that over another plate. That's how you learn. But so on the edges there, it's still rough. Maybe I should have ground it a little bit more. What I could do is let it dry out and I could grind it some more. Or I could try painting with this. Just see what happens with it. So let's put a little bit on a paintbrush. See what happens. Good thing I'm not putting any of my good scrolls right here. So hopefully you printed out this page as an example if you want to do the same thing. And paintbrush. And that's just a quick test to see whether or not. See, it's looking granular. So that one should have been ground a little bit more. And that's how you test that to find that out. You could grind it in here if you want something a little bit thicker than a toothpick for that, though. I had a good popsicle stick somewhere. Or the back of the paintbrush. So let me mix the second one up, knowing that that one has a little bit of an issue. I'm going to actually use some of the pre-ground. I've got just enough Glair in there. I didn't show the alizarin crimson off. This is alizarin crimson. Whenever it says alizarin, you know it's from the madder root. So this is actually a lake dye that somebody sold me at war. Not this year, obviously. And you steal a little bit out of it and blend it. The good thing is this will not mildew, will not mold, easily transportable, and I can change my mind whether I use it as a gouache or if I use it some egg yolk, more of a tempera paint, or I can mix it with gum arabic and, I'm sorry, a Glair, a gouache, Glair being the egg white, a gouache with gum arabic, or tempera with egg yolk. I have the choice. I'm not stuck to just one option. So that's a really brilliant orangey red. I would call this an orangey red or almost a fire engine red. And some of them tend to be a little bit anaerobic. So that's where sometimes you'll want to add a little bit of water to it. If it doesn't like that, it may break it up some. Or even a little bit of gum arabic. There is a thought that sometimes they cross them. Any other questions on doing this? Calcium carbonate and seashells. You think that's what it is? What might be? It doesn't actually add any whiteness to it. It's not a whitening effect on it. And the inside of the shell is more mother of pearl. So, those interesting studies that I'm not sure anybody's really done a whole lot on. See, and for a while there it fights you, and then suddenly it will start absorbing. So be aware if you start mixing, you say, oh, this isn't mixing at all. Just give it a little bit of time, and it will start to blend in. There. And we'll see what a professionally ground pigment does compared to my quick grinding on a tip plate. And that's just, it's time, patience, and practice on that. Okay. Well, we're going to go with it. See how that one works. I don't have a good wash for that yet. Never ever clean your brush this way. Okay. So that one, yeah, it's more translucent than we're used to with the gouaches. I could do a little bit more mixing with it. Let's see if I can get it up closer so you can see the difference in the first one versus the second. So let's see, the first one definitely needed more grinding. This one, it could be, it leaves a little bit more mixing, a little more translucent there, but it's starting to get there. So I'm doing pretty well in time. Let me see if I've lost track of what my notes are. So there, again, you add a little bit of water to that. I'm actually gonna try adding a little bit of water and see if that helps break it up. And you dry it in the shell and keep on reusing it. I've got some old ones that I had set aside. Here's an old one with some of the terra vert, the green earth, just mixed up. Just keep a box of literally little bits and pieces of things that I played with. I think that was some of the, of course this one. Cinabar, there we go, the Cinabar. I have those two tied in my mind. So you just keep them, re-wet them, and they're perfectly usable then. So any questions at this point? I've just been talking straight through here. Only a few questions from there. Oh, when you add the gum arabic, does it dissolve in the water? Oh, pre-dissolve the gum arabic. Literally, I've got an example. Stick stick it in a jar and let it dissolve overnight or over a few nights. Yeah, I think I got rid of all the bits there. So pre-dissolve your gum arabic. Don't put the raw rocks in there unless you want to wait a long time. If it's fine enough, it might dissolve quickly enough, but just like this, I mean, the egg white is faster. It would be slower. Even egg white's taking a little bit of time. It's getting better as it sits. I can see it. About how much gum arabic for a shell? It literally you do drops until it's right. One pigment, this is egg white, by the way, but for one pigment, it'll take a lot of liquid, and for another pigment, it'll take just a little bit. And that's the interesting thing. Every pigment has its own personality, and you have to learn the personality of the pigment. So it's not just that pull it from a tube and it's supposed to work. And even some of those tube ones, they don't quite work the same. Some tube paints work differently than others, and what you're seeing is the pigments respond differently. So it's getting better. So showing how the second one's getting thicker and better, just with a little more rework. Okay, let's see, what else do I have on this slide set? Oh, here, and I've given you all the sources that I've gotten a lot of this information from. A lot of good info out here. I've got a confession to make here. This was not originally my class. This was a class written by a 6-year-old and given at Loch Solier's, I think it was a Christmas revel, or Yule revel, a number of years ago. My daughter, when she was 6. So, because when she wanted to learn to paint, my mentor at the time, Mr. Zagrapina, said, well, then you'll have to learn to mix paints from scratch. And so learning to do that is just, it gives you so much of an opportunity to really understand your pigments and where they come from. So I've been sharing a class that was originally written by a 6-year-old because she actually learned it at that early age. Think about if you'd had to do this from at that age on, how much more you would understand. I'd like to open it up. Feel free to ask questions, please. Feel free to unmute yourself or give some of the things that you've experienced if you've ever done that. Have you ever worked with these raw pigments instead of from a tube? So I can go back to group. Anyone?
This is Stephanie. I saved some ash from a campfire that was just an absolutely gorgeous white. And I was wondering if you have any experience with campfire ash.
Well, I've used a bunch of different ashes. Yeah, it mixes up. It tends to be anaerobic, so you got to fight it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It does want to go into the suspension. Yeah, it works. The carbon black was a very common source of black. And if you've got some really good white, it'll probably go gray, but it can still be really gorgeous.
Right. Thank you. Oh, a follow-up question to that. Is there any concern about the lignin, is it lignin, right? That's in wood naturally, that can typically yellow over time. Is that a concern after a fire that you're aware of?
I've not seen that in the pigments. By the time you get to the dye extraction,
Mm-hmm.
not a whole lot of that lignin left, I think.
Okay.
But that might be on some of the scrolls when you see some deterioration. It could be one of the causes of it.
Yeah.
Okay, looking at the old Celtic knotwork stuff, there's some really gorgeous stuff, and it used a lot of earth tones. And no, the wood tones were later. So yeah, look at some of the stuff from Italy that uses Brazil wood. Logwood's another, but logwood's a litmus one. That's where it would change color faster than the background from the wood. Does everyone want to see what happens if you use an egg yolk? I can do an egg yolk real fast. Got a little time. So let me pick one that's easier to get out. because that's a pain. So for egg yolk, literally, remember, when you mix this up, this is going to be useless after the first few minutes. And the way you do that is you pierce the egg. Let's see if I can do this. You pour it out. Let me see if I can, yeah, there, it's squeezing out.
Did you have a question from the chat?
Yes.
For lac or cochineal, are you simply pouring the remnants of dye bath through a filter and saving the precipitate, or is there more to it?
You can do that. You can actually grind up the cochineal. You have to grind it fine enough. Or you can actually do the precipitate method that you use for most of the lake. Maybe I added too much in there. Most of the lake dyes. I've done both. The cochineal is so forgiving. It's expensive, but it's forgiving. I added a little bit too much yolk in this one, by the way, but you see the difference here. So yeah, the cochineal doesn't matter. You can do either way. There's the only problem with putting it through a lake is that you are adding a pH to it that, in my experience, tends to turn it more purple. So if you want more of a red, try using or a pinkish red. Try using the raw cochineal. If you filter it, by the way, you won't get anything. Probably you get, when it dries out, you will filter out all the particulate. So you've got to have some substrate for it to be on, but the cochineal bug is its own substrate. Okay, so here's the yolk-based one. And again, this is good for painting wood or outdoor things. So if you're going to paint something that may be stuck outdoors, I know some people have done rock scrolls, for instance, rock awards. This would be a better option.
Okay, there are 10 minutes left, and there is a comment in the chat about verdigris copper green will deteriorate scrolls. However, in the Middle East, they added just a little saffron that kept this from happening.
I was looking that up. I couldn't find that. Thank you. Yes, a little bit of saffron for some reason kept the verdigris from eating your scroll. Okay, so I wanted to show real fast the difference on, this is why I could tell that that one piece had some yolk in it. So I lost the, I'll just share it on here. There's more shine, it's hard to see, but there's more shine to it if it has the yolk in it. So that's something to watch for when you do it. Try not to get any yolk into it unless you wanted to do this on purpose, in which case don't put the extra white in it. But it's an option for painting on wood or other places where you have to make sure it's permanent. Let's see, a final note here about the, yes, the pH makes a big difference. Interesting thing is madder and cochineal are reversed. So use it, acidic makes it more orange and basic makes it more bluish. My experience is with madder it goes one way and cochineal it goes the other. I think cochineal, it's the acidic, is more orange, and yes, it goes to purple because you add washing soda to make it precipitate. So once you do that, it goes purple. Okay. Well, thank you all for attending. If you have any questions, my email is available. But please feel free to go out, feel enabled to go out and try this. Play around with this, play around with samples until you get a good feel for how your pigments actually work. And then use some of these techniques on some of the scrolls. Be careful, make sure it's, you know, somebody you want to give it to who understands how the pigments work. But don't be afraid of it. A lot of the pigments we use today are literally from these same techniques. Somebody else has just mixed them for you. Okay, well, thank you. And Sophia, I think I'm giving the room back to you. Not Sophia, I'm sorry, Serafina.